Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Woods. I serve you as General Secretary for the American Baptist Churches USA. We're so happy that you have joined us today for an everyday ABC conversation on homelessness and the housing crisis. These everyday ABC conversations grow out of something that American Baptists have been doing for 10 years now at our biennial mission summits, and that is to have mission summit conversations. The purpose of these conversations are to share some information about a topic that is important to many and certainly important to American Baptists, and then allow for some dialogue. And that's what we have today. This entire conversation today will last 1 hour, and we'll have some presentation by two persons who have a lot of knowledge to share in the field. And after about 20 minutes of presentation, then we'll have the opportunity to move into breakout rooms, into small groups, and share with one another. It's my great honor to introduce two persons today who will be sharing their knowledge with us, again, about the topic of homelessness and the housing crisis. Josh Sabo will be presenting first. Reverend Josh Sabo serves as coordinator of the Heartland Community of Care in Springfield, Illinois. In this role, Josh works with organizations, government leaders, the local health system, certainly communities of faith, and other community partners with the goal of functionally ending homelessness in the city of Springfield. Previously, some of you may know Josh as he served as an American Baptist pastor, lead pastor of Central Baptist Church in Springfield, Illinois. Following Josh's presentation, Jill Scalisi will be presenting. She currently serves as housing coordinator for the town of Brewster, Connecticut, developing affordable housing and providing support for residents. Committed to sharing God's love in practical ways and believing everyone should have a safe place to call home, Jill has master's degrees in social service and in law and social policy. Over the last 30 years, she has worked in Boston, in Philadelphia, in Cape Cod to assist folks experiencing homelessness to obtain and maintain housing. Jill is also a pastor's spouse, having been an active member of Brewster Baptist Mission Team for over 25 years, and has also served on the board of Habitat for Humanity of Cape Cod. Again, we are so fortunate to have these presenters today. Following their presentation, I'll come back on and greet you and give just a little bit of instruction for the small groups. Josh, we welcome you to present.
Thank you so much. And I'm excited to be a part of this event with Jill, and I'm excited to have some time to converse with you after these presentations as well and learn more about your experiences. As Jeff mentioned, I'm the coordinator of our local continuum of care. And I have to confess that for most of my time in ministry in this community, I had no idea what a continuum of care was, what it did, or the fact that we even had an opportunity to partner with our local continuum of care. And so wanted to start by saying maybe that's where you are as well. And so an action step for you might be to Google your county name and continuum of care and see what you learn if you were like me. Preferably maybe wait an hour to do that, but if I go on a little too long, by all means, just go ahead and see what we can figure out there. But I've been in this role for about 2 years, and so as I've been working in this role to develop partnerships and hopefully to pull people together to work in a direction that ultimately leads to our unhoused neighbors finding a place to call home, there's been a lot of moments along the way where I stopped and really just reflected on the fact that I wish I would have done more. I wish I would have known more when I was serving as a pastor of a church in our downtown area. And so I wanted to take a few moments today and just share a few of those reflections from my own experience. Again, your community makeup, your experiences are likely very different than mine, and I look forward to hearing more about those. But hopefully there's something in what I've experienced that hopefully is thought-provoking for you as well. The first thing that I think was a bit of a paradigm shift for me as a person in this community is that homelessness is solvable. One of the things that we are seeing happen across the country is that when communities come together, when they work together and collaborate and pull together the resources needed, it's possible to build a system of support that provides necessary housing and supportive services for people to thrive in a home that's theirs. And I don't know that I always believed that was true or even understood that that could be true. But the more that I try to understand homelessness and how it can be addressed, the more I do believe that's true. If you're kind of wondering about that, one place I would recommend you to to look further into is an organization called Community Solutions. And in particular, they have a movement called Built for Zero, which works with communities to try to get to a metric called functional zero. This, I think, is an important part of our paradigm as we think about what homelessness is and how to truly address it. It can be solved, and people who we might come into the picture with a number of biases or prejudices against, we've seen, and I've seen over and over again, people get into a safe and comfortable place that's theirs and experience a tremendous amount of life change. Building off of that, I think, I'm not even, you can see my slides. Okay, let's see here. Confused myself for a moment. There we go. Communities of faith are a key partner in ending homelessness. When you think about what exists in our local communities, there's a number of ways that we can be helpful partners as churches. I mentioned our church was a part of our local downtown neighborhood, and it was not an uncommon experience to end a sermon and shake hands and greet everyone that's there. And then there might be a couple people waiting with, they wanted to talk, maybe wanted to share a bit of their story. And there was a challenge in that we often did not have a lot of ideas of where to refer people to. Sometimes maybe the services were not open, or maybe we just hadn't taken the time to figure out how the system worked locally. And so a lot of times we would make recommendations, but a lot of times those recommendations were disconnected from the system of care that actually existed in our community. And depending on the way that your community works, it can be really complex to know what's available, to know when it's available, to know if there's rules that apply to people accessing various services. And that can make it really hard for us to point people in a direction where their needs might be met. Alongside that, I think it can take a lot of time to dig up that information, to develop contacts with organizations, and to gain an understanding of what best practices are. But I think it's imperative that churches do this work and to really dig into what's happening in their local communities and know where the gaps are. I think churches can be vital partners in filling gaps in their local homelessness system, whether it's through funding, volunteering, relational support, or other forms of support. Our faith communities are needed to be a part of homelessness ultimately being solved in our communities. Another thing that is increasingly been on my mind from this space is the value of being present to our unhoused neighbors and the way that changes the way we view homelessness. I think this is deeply connected to the previous point, but one thing I wish I would have done more when I was serving as a pastor is I wish I would have said, let me go with you to that resource, instead of saying, I think your needs can be met if you go to this place. You've got to walk over 3 streets, and then you've got to go west 2 more streets, and then make another left there, and it's going to be this weird looking building, but that's the door you got to enter into. I wish I would have stopped and actually walked with people to see what that was like. I think I operated out of my own assumptions and my own biases, and at that point in the day, I probably let my stomach growling dictate the way that I was present to the neighbors that were in need. And I wish I would have done that differently. I wish I would have been more present to what the experience of homelessness is like, not what I thought it was. I wish I would have thought more about what barriers exist for people and how difficult taking the next step can be, right? If a person's coming and asking, looking for a form of assistance, to give them complicated directions was not a very faithful way of being present for me in those situations. And so I've reflected a lot on that. And on a personal level, I still continue to work on those things. What does it look like for me to be faithfully present to my unhoused neighbors? And what might I have to offer in a different way? And in my own experience and what I believe is true, I believe that when we're truly present, we open up space for God to work in different ways. A lot of times that work is in us, but it very, very well could be God wanting to work through us. I just knocked my water over in case you missed that. But it very well could be God wanting to use us in ways that we weren't expecting as well. And I think presence is key in that. Um, Another point along with that is that I think we need to wrestle with how our view of grace impacts our understanding of both homelessness and poverty. A common attitude that I run into is that when we're talking about how to address homelessness, we might bump into the attitude that a person really needs to prove that they're ready for housing, that in order for them to be connected with a resource, they almost need to prove that they're worthy. I think this has, in our country, been a big part of the response to homelessness. We're seeing research constantly come out that says that when you connect a person with housing and you wrap the correct supports around them, it's amazing how successful that type of intervention can be. And when we house people first, because they're people, they're neighbors who are worthy and deserving of housing, but also connect them with whatever supports they need, it works. It truly does. And it's dignifying, and it honors the humanity and our neighbors around us. And yet, I think it's kind of fascinating that as people of faith, I recently read about a 2017 poll. So it's not that recent of a poll, but there's a 2017 poll by the Washington Post and Kaiser Research that seemed to indicate that Christians are more than twice as likely to blame a person's poverty on their lack of effort than other circumstances. And this is something that I think we need to wrestle with, right? Because we are people whose faith is grounded in the grace of a loving God. And so I think we should let that mess with us some, right? What factors should determine when a person is really worthy of housing or worthy of a church's benevolence? How can we know if we as people of faith, if we're actually helping a person or hurting them because of the way that we're offering support or not offering it? I think these are complex conversations for churches to have, and my hope is that these conversations never stray too far from the remembrance of how grace and love beyond what we can earn has touched our own lives. I think when we approach these issues with that grace in mind, it changes things. It changes us. It changes the way we as individuals and as churches approach these issues. And with that, I'll leave you with a couple lines from a hymn that we've all sung a time or two, I would imagine. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace that brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. I think that's true in so many ways, right? But as people of faith, as we think about homelessness, my prayer for me, for you, for us, for our churches, is that grace helps us to be a part of people making their way home. And with that, I'll pass it over to Jill so we can hear from her experience.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Josh. I appreciate your sharing very heartfelt words and good things for us to all wrestle with. And I also appreciate Josh's sharing from a situation within the city. And I live in Brewster, Massachusetts, in a more rural environment, but we're both dealing with homelessness, and this is a situation across our country. Personally, my interest and calling to address homelessness began back in 1985 when I was a college freshman. During a winter session in Mexico, I first encountered people living on the streets. And then I had the stark realization that there were folks living on the streets of Philadelphia, New York, and across the United States of America. I believe that it's God's desire for all of God's children to have a safe place to live, a place to call home. This belief to me is exemplified in Matthew 25, verses 37 to 40. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you? And the king will answer, then truly I tell you, just as you did it for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it for me. So this belief has guided much of my post-college education work and volunteer experience. And as a result, I have developed relationships and worked with people experiencing homelessness in Boston, Philadelphia, and on Cape Cod. It's been a blessing to get to know many interesting, generous, and faith-filled people who were also houseless. And that's a phrase that was shared with me by someone who was living in a shelter environment. It's also been extremely difficult to deal with addiction, mental health challenges, lack of services, and the high cost of housing. When I began working at St. Francis House, a day shelter in Boston in the late 1980s, mental illness and addiction were the largest stumbling blocks I saw. Over the past 25 plus years, I've seen a new challenge, and that's there's hardly any affordable housing. After the economic recovery of 2008 to 2010, that recession, I discovered a new landscape on Cape Cod that's only gotten much worse with the COVID-19 pandemic. A housing choice, just a little information, a housing choice voucher, which is also referred to as a Section 8 certificate. This is a federal voucher which enables the holder to pay 30% of their income for rent. And the voucher holder then receives a subsidy to cover any differential between their rent payment and the full lease price of their unit, that rent. And this allowable lease rent can be up to the local fair market rent. So for example, on Cape Cod, the fair market rent for a one-bedroom unit is $1,428. For a two-bedroom unit, it's $1,879. So you'd be able to use your housing choice voucher to get an apartment at that price. So it used to be that when someone received a housing choice voucher after waiting for years on a wait list, it was like receiving the Willy Wonka golden ticket. That's it, you've got it. Here it is, your answer. Here's affordable housing, an automatic guarantee. Now, it's almost impossible to find an apartment or home rental in our community. It doesn't matter if you have a rental voucher. It doesn't matter if you have $2,500 a month to spend. There are still hardly any rentals available. In my town, the wait list for our local housing authority is over 10 years. This lack of available housing led me to leave direct service work where I help folks experiencing homelessness to find and maintain housing and move to a position that focused more on creating housing, especially affordable housing. A few facts. In 2020, there were more than 580,000 Americans experiencing homelessness. More than 70% were individuals. Only 19% of the homeless population is considered chronically homeless. These are folks who have experienced homelessness for at least a year or repeatedly, while struggling with a disabling condition such as a serious mental illness, a substance disorder, or a physical disability. While the chronically homeless definition matches many people's stereotypes of homelessness, the vast majority of people experiencing homelessness do not fit this description. In my town, home prices have increased over 40% in the past 2 years and almost another $100,000 in the past 5 months. Today, the median home price for a sale is $753,000. In 2017, it was $425,000. Every week, I read several newspaper articles about housing challenges. They can be found in local and national papers across the country. Perhaps you saw the article in The Atlantic last week, The Revolt Against Homelessness, which dealt with public sentiment and issues around homelessness in California. Our Sunday paper yesterday had an article, Rising Rents Rattle Tenants. In the housing world, someone is considered cost burdened if they pay more than 30% of their income for housing. Right now, increased federal rent assistance tied to the COVID-19 pandemic is ending, and at the same time, renters are seeing sharp increases in their rent. It's a challenging combination. Speaking about the rental crisis, the CEO of Citizens Housing and Planning Association stated, "This is really because our housing production is lacking. We produce about half the number of homes we did 30 years ago." The church has an opportunity to be impactful in several ways. First and foremost, learn about the issue and understand the situation in your specific context. And I really think Josh spoke to that. This is part of what we're doing today. We're learning broadly and having conversations with one another, but we also need to understand what's going on in our unique community. The church can first assist people experiencing homelessness. And again, following Josh, we can partner with local organizations and churches. For example, here in Cape Cod, the Overnights of Hospitality, we had over 30 congregations across the Cape participating in hosting either men or women overnight in their houses of worship. These were different denominations of faith, Jewish, Catholic, Baptist, Methodist, and so on. We may not have agreed on everything doctrinally, but we could come together to share God's love and meet the practical needs of our neighbors with a place to sleep. Second, we can work to create more housing. Habitat for Humanity, an organization based on Christian values, partners with families in need of an affordable home to build one of their own, fostering stability, self-reliance, and a strong sense of community. Our church has participated and worked with volunteer work days with Habitat, on mission trips, and also with financial sponsorship and joining with other churches to do so. Churches can also look at creative uses of church property. Some churches have been able to build housing, others to rent out a property that the church has. As an individual, maybe you can rent a room or build an accessory dwelling unit, which a lot of communities are trying to make easier. And speaking of that, be involved in your community. It's amazing how many decisions like zoning are made at a local level. And community resistance is a major factor in stopping housing from being built. The church can respond here. Finally, I want to say the church can help the congregation to better understand housing challenges and the spiritual dimension of addressing housing and homelessness. The church can speak to this issue from the pulpit and from the pew. Many of us have personally experienced homelessness or have family, friends, and fellow church members who are in need of an affordable place to live. We are not alone. Even Jesus said in Luke 9:58, "Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." And I just want to thank you this afternoon for taking the time to come together. And it's something I really appreciate about our American Baptist Church family, that we care, that we look around, and we look for ways to share God's love and to have conversations about things that are important to us. So thank you very much for this being here and this opportunity for Josh and I to share.
Thank you very much. I learned a couple of things myself today. I did not know that only 19% of those who are homeless are chronically homeless. That's a helpful statistic. And Josh, you really convicted me in terms of a pastor of taking an individual, to that service, walking with that individual to that service. And I do know that often the services are not located really where they need to be. A lot of times they're too far away from where they need to be, where the needs are. But thank you again for presenting. In just a moment, we're going to move into then some small groups. There'll be no report out of these small groups, so no reason to take notes other than just for yourself if you want to. And these are not escape rooms. You can click anytime and come back to the main room if you have a question about anything. And if toward the end you feel like, wow, this is really a great conversation, we want to continue it, you would need to share voluntarily your contact information with one another. We're not able to give out that information from the main source or from ABC. You would have to share that individually. A few guidelines as you have conversation. I'm sure many of you are aware of these. We call them the ABCs of dialogue. Number one, acknowledge that there are differences among us. We don't all have the same views of this, and just acknowledge that. B stands for be a good listener. Try to listen in a way that you could summarize what the person said, that you're listening that intently before you're speaking, confidentiality is important, but we sometimes say, you know, it's okay to share an idea, just be careful not to attribute something to an individual. But we want you to pick up ideas during the conversation. And finally, just speak honestly and responsibly. We often do that by using I statements rather than you statements to begin a sentence. So again, as we seek to be the kind of people that you have called us to be as Christians and as American Baptists. This we pray in God's name. Amen. Again, thank you for joining us for this call, and we hope that it was productive for you and brightens your day. We will see you soon. Goodbye.